I need to say a few things to begin with. I'm Tom Walker. I'm a member of the board of the Athens chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I want to make three announcements before I announce the wonderful speaker that we have. First, 4 Athens school districts are giving 0.15 CEUs to its teachers who attend this lecture. Also, social workers, counselors, and nurses can receive 1.5. If you want either type of CEU, you please sign the appropriate sign-up sheet on the display table up there. Or for some school districts, sign the flyers that we have, and I'll initial the thing, and you do whatever you need to do to get your CEU. I would certainly, if you need to contact me, if you're not having, this is the first time for 3 of the school districts. If you need to contact me, I'm just Walker. I'm Tom Walker, but I'm just, hi. And I'm Walker at ohio.edu. I'm a professor. It's not that I'm the most important Walker in all of Ohio that I have a, in fact, my wife would debate that immensely, fervently. But I teach at the university, so Walker at ohio.edu. If you have any trouble getting the CEUs, contact me and we'll work that out. Okay. Please note that social workers, counselors, and nurses should also fill out the evaluation form. We have an evaluation form back there. So thank you for that. Now let me note that this talk and others co-sponsored others in this series are co-sponsored by Athens County Library and the Athens chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We at NAMI want to thank the library and Todd Bastine for their support. Finally, NAMI is an organizer is an organization for and by persons having loved ones with mental illnesses. Our brochures are also up there, and among other things, we do some things that are very important for people that have loved ones with mental illness, and for the loved ones with mental illness. I don't know if you know, because it's such a unspoken of illness, but 1 in 5 people have or will have a serious mental illness in their lifetime. So it strikes everyone virtually. If it's not you personally being mentally ill, it's somebody that you love and maybe have a responsibility for that's going to have a mental illness. So among the various things that we do, such as this thing, we help train the police and in crisis intervention. We take crisis calls. So if you're having a problem and want to discuss it with somebody, we're available. And Lori, our wonderful office manager, where is Lori? Right there. Excuse me. You probably leave the message on the phone, 740-593-7424, and then she'll bounce it off to somebody that will be answering the crisis call. We also have a course called Family to Family, which is free. It's I think 10 courses, 10 nights a row. 11 nights in a row, and you have ladies such as my beloved wife back there who just spoke up, and Marilyn Hockwart, and who else teaches Family to Family? Janet's not here. Yes, she is. Oh, how blessed we are. How blessed we are that Janet is here. So we have family to family, where you learn all about the different illnesses. You learn how to navigate this experience that is absolutely new to most of us, having all of a sudden finding we have somebody that has a mental illness, how to take care of yourself and those things. So that's family to family. And then we have support group, which is every first and third Thursday of the month. We meet over in Appalachian Behavioral Health Care, the mental hospital, 100 Hospital Drive, and we just sit around in a circle, and everybody in there is somebody that has a loved one with a mental illness, and we try to focus on the person that's freshest to the challenge of having a loved one with a mental illness.
What time does it meet, Tom?
It meets at 6 o'clock, first and third Thursdays. And you can look all of this up on our webpage, NAMIAthensOhio.org. Now, let me introduce our speaker. She's a local girl, Donna Lechleiter, is known to and beloved of many of you. A registered nurse who had a 25-year career in psychiatric home health, mental health, and hospice, Donna will discuss how bipolar disorder impacted her life, her recovery, and her current life as a mom, a mental health activist with NAMI Athens. She's on the board or has been on the board and has taught peer-to-peer. A member of the Athens Photographic Project. I'd probably just be able to get the last 3 words out. President of the Front Porch Project and Bible education volunteer. So please help me welcome Donna.
Call my talk Bipolar Disorder from the Inside Out. I thought, well, that's true. I live with bipolar myself. I have family members with it. I have friends with it. And in my work as a nurse, I cared for people with it and struggled with it. But then I thought a little bit more. Some of us have this lived experience inside us that can be overwhelming. Experience that makes us feel different and alone, and sometimes even ashamed. Hiding it becomes an exhausting burden. But the wise and beloved Winnie the Pooh weighs in on this. He said, "When you are a bear of very little brain, and you think of things, and sometimes you find sometimes that a thing which seemed very thingish inside you is quite different when it gets out into the open and has other people looking at it." So with that, I'll tell you my story first. About 50 years ago, my birth mother was a senior at Michigan State University, and they did not allow pregnant women on campus. So local OBGYN doc obliged the students and prescribed amphetamines so they wouldn't gain weight and they could hide their pregnancies. So I was born with a sensory system that was overwhelmed. I slept very little. As an infant, 20 minutes at a stretch, as my parents remind me all the time. And at age 2, I slept for 1 hour at a stretch, with maybe a couple hours in between. In childhood, I was intense. Once when I was 5 in kindergarten with my cousin, I inadvertently hurt her feelings, and when I found out about it, my instant reaction was that I deserved to die. And I got on our table and tried to go head first to make that happen. Fortunately, I just ended up with a few bruises. But I would spend, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I would spend hours crying over social causes and crisis going on in the world. We lived in LA, and I would sneak the Los Angeles Times out of the recycle bin, and I would read it, and read it, and read it, and cry, and cry, and cry, and sneak it back, because my parents didn't want me reading it. And that was just really unusual for a child that age. I was painfully shy and reluctant to participate in activities. But when I turned 14, there was a change. I became filled with energy. I started running every morning before school, 3 to 5 miles a day, just for myself. Then after school, I ran cross country or track or played basketball. I was in every club. I cheered for our teams. I marched with the band. I worked part-time, and I kept perfect grades. I giggled incessantly, and I bounced like Tigger, and it was all on 3 or 4 hours sleep a night. But my parents were happy because I was no longer this sullen child. And everything went along like this until spring break of my senior year. Then I just got out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and told my dad that I wasn't going back to school, that I wanted to die. Well, my parents took me to our pediatrician, and his take on it was that I was an overachiever who needed to rest. So I went 1 quarter to OU, then dropped out, but eventually I came out of the depression and once again had excessive energy, drive, and giddiness. I didn't know it, but I was hypomanic during these times. But I didn't know it. I didn't know there was a name for it. I just knew how I was. I became involved with a volunteer Christian ministry full-time, worked 32 hours a week, and got married. With the exception of a few minor depressions, I continued on this way until I was 22. Hypomania was my normal. But at 22, I became suicidal, and I experienced my first hospitalization on a psych unit. And the plan was to start me on medication. Well, the next morning, we found out I was pregnant. So instead of medication, I went to a therapist twice a week for cognitive behavioral therapy, which helped me to learn how to talk back to unhealthy thinking patterns and to become more reasonable. When my daughter was 3 months old, my mood improved. A year later, the hypomania returned, this time with some irritability and not so nice things mixed in. But during this time, I went to school and became an LPN. After a little while, I returned to school to become an RN. But during this time, I was assaulted and raped. But I finished the quarter. Then I fell into a deep depression. The doctor, who I only saw when I was depressed, prescribed an antidepressant. I was promptly thrown into a full-blown mania. I didn't sleep for days on end, yet never felt tired. I talked really fast, had really fast thoughts, was extremely irritable with angry outbursts, was impulsive and with poor judgment. I maxed out every credit card we had, wiped out our savings and checking account, joining causes. I gave to every cause that there was possible to give. But I wasn't depressed anymore, and I didn't go back to the doctor because I wasn't depressed. 6 months later, my husband, who struggled with depression, agreed finally, after years of trying to get him to go, went to the doctor. And while we were at the appointment, I was adamant and overbearing and insisting that they hospitalize him for suicide risk. The more they wouldn't believe me, the more outraged I became. I was moving around the room and gesturing really big. Well, they diagnosed me with bipolar 1 disorder, episode manic, and they gave me medicine. But they started Cliff on medication also for his depression. But 5 days later, he took his life, overdosing on that very medication. It was horrifying. Our daughter had just turned 4. Our lives became chaotic, and we both became very, very depressed. But it wasn't long before my moods became tumultuous, and during a manic high, I met and became engaged to a man I knew for 2 weeks. And we became married a month later. And when we married, I moved my daughter 3 hours away from family, away from friends, to just an unknown. And I was confident about it. So he had bipolar disorder also. He married me after 2 weeks. So a few years into the marriage, in a short progression of time, he fractured his back. He suffered the effects of an enlarged heart. Then he had a series of small strokes that left him without impulse control. And our home became filled with violence. And the more unstable our home was, the more unstable I became. I started having mixed episodes where I would have symptoms of depression and symptoms of mania all at the same time. And this is dangerous when you're suicidal and then you're impulsive and energetic. That becomes lethal. After a while, I became rapid cycling, where I would change from mania to depression and back again. And it got so severe, I was even doing that in the same day. So I was overwhelmed, exhausted, and terrified, and I was hospitalized 7 times. I had reached my limit. I felt there was no help at all, and I wasn't going back to the hospital again. I was going to die. So I drove to a payphone. I'm dating myself here. I drove to a payphone, and the phone reached into the car, because I felt I needed to apologize to my doctor and tell him he was not at fault. He kept me talking, and he managed to get clues as to where I was. The next thing I knew, I was surrounded by 3 police cars, and 6 officers were out and surrounding my car. My thoughts were loud and racing through my head. I was exasperated, I was angry at myself. And vaguely, I could just barely hear an officer saying something, but I couldn't make it out and I couldn't focus on it at all. But then suddenly I made out her words, "Don't move or I'll shoot." Well, in that instant, I thought, this is it. So I moved to the right. Well, no shots were fired. An officer had entered the car from the back, rear door, and he was over the top of the seat, pinning me down. And the crook of his elbow was around my neck, and I was choking and struggling to get free to breathe. Well, he increased his force, and by the time I got to the police station, blood was dripping down my face, my nose was broken, my lip was busted, I had bruises starting everywhere, and instead of being taken to the psych hospital, I went to jail for resisting arrest. And the thing of it was, the absolute only thing I had in the car with me was a credit card. I didn't even have a purse. I just had a credit card that I was going to buy the medication with, that I was going to overdose with. And I know that they had to do what they had to do to subdue me because they thought I had a weapon. But I really believe that once they realized I had no weapon and I had nothing that could be used as a weapon, they could have backed off on the aggressive force. I mean, where was I going to go? There were 6 of them. I wasn't going anywhere. Well, at this point, every time I keep thinking I'm at the absolute bottom, it gets worse. So at this point, I was desperate. So I had electroconvulsive therapy, also known as shock therapy. And it saved my life, literally and figuratively. After this, medications became more effective for me, and my thinking became clearer, and we were able to move out of our tumultuous home situation and have a more peaceful life. And I did well for several years, except for 2 terrible exceptions, and both were triggered by medical situations whereby my psychiatric medications were interfered with. In one manic episode, my judgment became so impaired and my impulsiveness so high, I engaged in sexual promiscuity to a great degree of recklessness. In 1 month, I was with 17 men. I only knew 3 of them. It is dangerous beyond belief and completely against my moral standards. I never had sex with either one of my husbands until after we were married. So this totally destroyed my sense of self. Then the other episode, I was under the delusion that I was sent to help, heal, and rehabilitate a certain homeless man in the community. He was known to be violent. He used heroin, but I believed that nothing bad would happen because I was sent to do this. I was in control of the situation, and only good things would happen. So I picked him up off the street and took him home, and I wiped out my entire financial everything, caring for him, and he brought heroin and violence into the middle of my living room. And my only consolation in that situation is that my daughter was away at her grandmother's when all that happened. So shortly after this happened, my daughter and I moved back to Athens, and I was finally able to complete school and become an RN. And it's now been 14 years since my last hospitalization and 10 years since my last major mania. Now, when these things were very thingish inside me, I felt alone, isolated, and disconnected. Bipolar disorder had hijacked my identity. I knew I had to do something to recover, not be cured, but return to a purposeful life, managing my illness, manifesting resiliency. I made the decision to change doctors to a more hopeful one. At the same time, I renewed my spiritual activities, Bible reading, prayer, attending Christian meetings, and eventually sharing in volunteer Bible educational work again. This has given me hope, purpose, and a circle of loving friends. Thereafter, I started therapy with a therapist who used a variety of types of therapy to help me to think and act in healthier ways, to be more reasonable and adaptable. He also referred me to NAMI for support. And through NAMI, I received support and education through their peer-to-peer course and took training, then participated in teaching it. I served on the board of directors, which gave me opportunity for education and trainings. And I currently speak at crisis intervention trainings and at classes for the cadets at Hocking College. And that's something I never thought I would be able to do. Through my NAMI contacts, I became involved with the Athens Photo Project, which provides mental health recovery through expressive photography in a peer support environment. I've been a part of the program for 7 years and have had the privilege of sharing my work in 12 shows and exhibitions, including my first solo show here at the library in February. I continue to have the privilege of being on the board of directors, and there's been a gradual progression from I'm learning to take pictures to I'm an artist, and I have a lot of friends in the program. Through APP came the Front Porch Project, which develops questions and research that determines what's best in mental health recovery in rural Ohio. And I feel like my lived experience is valued and of use. So I strive to maintain resiliency by putting spiritual things first, taking my medicine and monitoring my symptoms and following up with the doctor, building meaningful relationships, engaging in purposeful activity, and always having time for music and holding my dog Ruru. So things are not so thingish anymore. So that's my story. But what is bipolar disorder? It's also known as manic depression, and 6 million adult Americans are affected by it. It's treatable. It's marked by extreme changes in mood, thoughts, energy, and behavior. It is not a character flaw or a sign of personal weakness. It's caused by a neurochemical imbalance in the brain. Mood can alternate between the poles of high manias and low depressions, and these mood swings can last for hours, days, weeks, or months. In mania, you can experience a high mood, exaggerated optimism, an exaggerated self-confidence, excessive irritability, aggressive behavior, a decreased need for sleep without fatigue, grandiose thoughts, racing speech, racing thoughts, impulsiveness, poor judgment, reckless behavior, and delusions, which those are beliefs that you hold as being true, very seriously true, but they really have no facts to back them up. In fact, they have facts to the contrary. Sometimes we always hear the one where people think that someone is out to get them. That's a delusion. And hallucinations, where your senses appear real, but it's created in the mind, and you can think that you're seeing things or hearing things or smelling things or something like that. In depression, you may have prolonged sadness or crying spells, significant changes in appetite or sleep, irritability, anger, worry, agitation, anxiety, pessimism, indifference, difficulty making decisions, decreased energy, persistent lethargy. Brushing your teeth can become a chore. Inability to concentrate, inability to take pleasure in former interests, social withdrawal, unexplained aches and pains, and recurring thoughts of death and suicide. And people with bipolar disorder experience depression more often than they experience mania or hypomania. And just as a fact, the World Health Organization says that depression is the leading cause of disability in the world. Winston Churchill, who is said to have had bipolar disorder, called his profound depressed times, "A black dog is coming to visit." A gentleman took that idea and wrote a little story about this black dog coming to visit, and the World Health Organization turned it into 2 videos that are on YouTube. One is "I had a black dog, his name was Depression," and the other is "Living with a Black Dog." They're about 5 minutes long, they're animated, and they really give in a nutshell the picture of what depression is and how to live with it. And since it's during the time of depression that most people seek help, they end up with a diagnosis of major depression. And the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance found that 7 out of 10 people are misdiagnosed at least once, and the average length of time between onset of symptoms of bipolar to correct diagnosis and treatment is 10 years. So bipolar 1 is 1 or more manic or mixed episodes with periods of major depression, and the mania is extreme. Bipolar 2, 1 or more major depressive episodes with at least 1 episode of hypomania with possible level moods in between. Cyclothymia is when you have several hypomanic episodes and milder depressants for at least 2 years. Rapid cycling is when you have 4 or more manic, hypomanic, or depressive episodes in any 12-month period. You can differentiate bipolar disorder from ordinary mood variations by the intensity, the duration, and the interference with life that they have. The National Institute of Mental Health says that in children and teens, mood swings are more extreme and accompanied by changes in sleep, energy level, and ability to think clearly. Symptoms are so strong, they make it hard for a young person to do well in school or get along with their friends or family members. And some young people try to hurt themselves or attempt suicide. Mania in a young person, they can feel very happy or silly in a way that's unusual for them or for other people their age. Have very short temper, talk really fast about a lot of different things. Trouble sleeping but not feel tired. Trouble staying focused. Talk and think about sex more often and do risky things. A depressive episode may look like feeling very sad, complaining about pain a lot, like stomach aches and headaches, sleeping too little or too much, having little energy and no interest in fun activities, and thinking about death or suicide. And the World Health Organization says that depression is the predominant cause of illness and disability for both boys and girls aged 10 to 19 years old. So a note about anxiety. It can be a symptom of bipolar itself, or it can be a separate anxiety condition. When you have conditions together, it's called comorbid. If it's part of bipolar itself, it'll improve as the bipolar gets better. If it's a separate condition, it could persist even if the bipolar improves, and then you need to treat it accordingly. In the book, mental professionals use to diagnose mental health disorders, it notes that bipolar disorder has the highest rates of co-occurring substance use disorder, with 60% of people with bipolar 1 having a lifetime diagnosis of substance use disorder, which is the misuse of drugs. With anxiety, irritability, racing thoughts, depression, and all more, 45% of the people with bipolar disorder also have an alcohol use disorder. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, depression is the most common condition associated with suicide and is often undiagnosed and untreated. Anxiety, drugs, and alcohol use problems, especially when unaddressed, also increase the risk for this. And regarding suicide, the most current data from the Centers for Disease Control says that suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34, and the fourth leading cause of death for ages 35 to 54. All age groups combined is the 10th leading cause of death. Suicide is moving up with every update to these statistics. And there are now 5 suicides for every 2 homicides. For each completed suicide, there are roughly 25 attempted suicides, and for every attempt, there are countless agonizing thoughts debating the possibility of it. So if you find yourself considering it, seek help immediately. Tell someone, don't be alone, call crisis services, suicide hotline, don't wait. And I had a little list of resources to hand out, but I had a computer glitch. But I remembered the 1-800-SUICIDE is what you can call. There's other resources too, and if anybody wants the list, they can give me their contact information and I will send it to you. So of course, treatment's vital for quality of life and for life itself. And generally, the first line of treatment is medication. In the brain, we have neurons, and neurotransmitters carry impulses between them. And among other things, these affect mood, thoughts, energy levels, impulse control, focus, pain perception, and other sensations. And they need to be in just the right balance. The neurons have places where the neurotransmitters are made, where they're stored, where they're released, where they're recycled, where they're received, and something can go awry in one or more of these areas. So different medications affect the function of the neurons and neurotransmitters in different ways. In the treatment of bipolar disorder, there are 3 main classes and with a variety of drugs in each class. You have mood stabilizers and mood stabilizing anticonvulsants. You have antipsychotics, which decrease mania and delusions and hallucinations. They can also work along with an antidepressant for mood stabilization. And you have antidepressants. But you do need to exercise care in taking an antidepressant alone because it has the potential of kicking you into mania. because so many different effects, it may take a while to find the right medicine or combination. It can take being on the right dose of the right medicine for several weeks to see the response you want. So you can't give up. A couple other medical treatments, I had mentioned ECT or shock therapy, and then there's vagus nerve stimulation. So we have counseling where we can find support for us as individuals and for our relationships. And we can learn coping skills and receive practical guidance. And it's a place for therapy to develop healthier ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. In group therapy, you can gain additional insights and support while promoting communication skills. And a person who has the dual diagnosis of bipolar disorder and alcohol or substance use disorder needs specialized treatment for dual diagnosis. The best strategies for bipolar disorder need to be integrated with the most effective treatments for addiction. They may include one-on-one, group, family therapy, and often cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior therapy are used to teach the individual how to regulate emotions and avoid being overwhelmed by dramatic mood swings. Thomas Jefferson said, "Who then can so softly bind up the wound of another as he who has felt the same wound himself?" Peer support. It occurs when people share knowledge, experience, emotional, social, practical skills, practical help with each other. It provides opportunities for inclusion and social connectedness, both vital to wellness and resiliency. The Gathering Place. It's been in operation since 1969. It offers multiple peer support opportunities through a variety of activities and services, and it's a lifeline to many people in the community. Tom talked about NAMI Athens. It's made up of people whose lives and families have been touched by mental illness, and they offer support as well as being a treasure trove of resources. Then in the atmosphere of peer support, Athens Photographic Project members experience creative growth and artistic development as they rebuild confidence, strengthen life skills, and recognize the value of their lives. Some members recently said they would be isolated, without purpose, and in a dark place mentally without APP. Mental health facilities are starting to utilize specially trained peer support specialists who are certified in the state of Ohio. But anything that supports wellness will have a positive effect on mental health. Sleep is essential. Disruptions in sleep can trigger depressed or manic episodes. Healthy eating, exercise, even just a little walking, finding ways to reduce stress, some sort of art or crafts or sport. Maybe it's reading or writing or music or volunteering. River Road Rabbit Rescue is looking for volunteers to socialize their bunnies. What could be better than sitting down and snuggling a rabbit for an hour? Another one that I liked when I was looking into this, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is Japanese Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. It's a form of going into the forest in such a way that you really come to appreciate nature. So in conclusion, bipolar is a serious illness that affects all parts of your life. But with treatment, it is possible to recover a meaningful life, meaningful relationships, and purposeful activity, and manage symptoms with resiliency. Thank you.
Questions? Takes a lot of courage to say all you said, and yet it's really important.
Yes.
Donna, thank you for having the courage to tell us all about you. And it really is a privilege to know you, and thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
And Donna, thanks for all you do at APP. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'm curious as to how many teachers are here. Can you raise your hands? Because you're all going to be running into people with bipolar that it's just emerging, and maybe it's not diagnosed, and so on.
Yes.
So it kind of lends well into my question was just about if you can speak a little bit more about early intervention and kind of how critical that is, what that looks like in terms of, I know in your speech you mentioned 10 as kind of a diagnosis age a couple of times, but can you talk even younger? I work early ed, so younger kiddos, even younger than 10.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that. I know that there is some controversy about actually diagnosing kids younger than 9 or 10 with bipolar disorder. But usually what it comes down to is, are they exhibiting things with regards to their energy and like sleep patterns and eating patterns, those basic life patterns that are extreme compared to like other kids the same age, like as a baseline.
Do they kind of take that same route as an adult would in terms of medication and therapy? Is that kind of how it's going for
Yeah, they do
kids?
things to try to get like a regular routine in the home and school, to get a regular routine. The more regular the routine, the more stable you can be. It's that way with adults too, the more regular your routine. And there is some medication use.
Having
in children.
experienced bipolar as a kid, what are some things that you wish, what are some interventions or strategies that you wish you would have had at a young age that you now or since learned about?
I just wish someone had acknowledged what I was feeling. Really. Because I felt like I was strange. I felt like I was strange, and I felt like I stood out. And I felt it was really difficult for me to make friends because I felt so poorly about myself. And I didn't like I just didn't like myself. And I think if somebody had recognized that, maybe something would have been different. It goes back to that thing that's all thingish inside you with nobody looking at it. Or if you can get it out there. But like when I was in high school, when I was a junior, we were doing poetry, and I wrote, and I was in a low time that was just like temporary. It wasn't really a long, severe time, but it was low enough, and I wrote a poem that alluded to suicide. And my teacher called me aside and told me I was writing depressing stuff. And that's as far as, and she wasn't like, you're writing depressing stuff, how are you feeling? It was just, you're writing depressing stuff here. Like, what's wrong with you?
Criticizing?
Yeah, like, what's wrong with you? So I didn't write anymore. For school, I wrote in my journals, but I didn't write anymore for school. And that just made me feel worse,
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Donna, I want to thank you for being so honest with us and sharing with us. My question is, do you have any tips for dealing with people who are going through depression or bipolar disorder? If there's someone that, I were to meet in my life, they're going through that, do you have any tips on how I can, relate to them better or help them?
Yeah, I think being a good listener. Sometimes we think we have to fix everything, but sometimes just being able to listen and show empathy and that you understand the person's feelings can give them reassurance. You know, encourage whatever their treatment plan is, if they're taking medicine or if there's other things in their treatment plan, seeing a counselor or if they're doing other things in their life that are, if they're forest bathing or if they're doing other things in their life that are part of their plan, encourage them to stick with it and to be around people because you tend to isolate.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So have you shared your story with your interaction with the police, with other groups of police, and what was their response?
Yeah, it's been really positive. Because I have a few other interactions with the police too that I share with them in that setting too, and they are really glad to know this kind of thing, and they always show an interest in maybe how things could have gone differently.
She's done our week-long CIT training, and they just love her. And the training of cadets up at Hocking College, they just love her. It's so useful to them to hear somebody who can talk about the illness from the inside out and can talk about interactions with the police. You know, I think their whole attitude just changes, and it's the consumer panel that gets practically the highest ratings among the police. They do like role playing, I think that's their number one, but the cops just love the consumer panel, particularly you.
Yeah.
I just wondered about your daughter, if, how it affected her or did it, impact her life and how that did work out between the two of you?
Yeah. We have a really good relationship now, but it was hard for a long time because she was growing up when I was experiencing a lot of this. She was growing up and she didn't have her father either, so it was very difficult for her. But we still live together. She's 27 now, and I think we're very good friends.
She has is it an artistic presentation or something that's coming up real soon?
Yeah, she's in the Athens Photographic Project too, so we share that. Oh, yes.
Donna, thank you for your education component of your talk and also for your personal story. It took a lot of courage. Sometimes we're told that one of the cruelties of having a mental illness is the inability to recognize that. The inability to understand that the person, him or herself, has it. And I'm wondering, it almost sounds as though I'm wondering if you felt relief when you could accept that diagnosis and understand your place in the world. When you were mentioning about crying at the LA Times and all sorts of things that you felt painted the world so drastically.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and by the time I was an adult, it was affecting my relationships so severely too. And getting the diagnosis was helpful in understanding, like, why was I behaving a certain way? when I felt like it was not true to who I was, but I was behaving in certain manners. And having the diagnosis and then understanding that it was biological, it was neurochemical, and it wasn't a character flaw. It didn't make all the bad things I had said and done go away, but it made me have more insight into it.
How long did it take for you to get a cocktail, a medication cocktail that seemed to work?
Let me think. Well, if you go from my first hospitalization when I was 22 for depression, until something that really worked well, so I would not be having like really ups and downs at all, was probably 7 years ago. So maybe 20 years. But there were periods in there where it was pretty good. It wasn't all like bad. There was like maybe a 7, 6 or 7 on a scale of 10, you know, but it wasn't until like the last several years that I would say it's more like an 8 or a 9. Yeah. Yes.
Could you explain a little more about the electroconvulsive therapy and what it does to your brain? And is it like a one-time treatment, or is it a continuing thing?
Yeah. What it is, it's not what you see on TV. Just a little while back, my daughter and I were watching The Simpsons, and I never used to watch The Simpsons, so this was new to me. And Homer's getting ECT. And I was like, what is going on? And that is not how it works at all. And basically, it's done in a setting that sort of looks like a modified surgery setting, because you have anesthesia. You have anesthesia and you have medicine that prevents your body from moving, because you have a small, tiny little electrical shock that will induce a small seizure in your brain. But you don't have the movement because you have medicine to prevent that. But it's just a matter of seconds that this takes place. It takes longer to get on the table and get the blood pressure cuff on and get they also give you oxygen, and to get everything all set up for a few seconds of therapy. You do have most people have some short-term memory loss around the time of the therapy. Then it's individual how many sessions that you have, but usually it takes a few to get things stabilized, but you usually see dramatic results after the first one. Like for me, I was so intensely suicidal, and I had those symptoms of mania where I was just impulsive, and I had so much energy, and I was thinking so fast, I could think of plans right and left, I could outwit anybody who was trying to stop me, and everything. And I had that ECT the first session, and it all stopped. All those racing feelings stopped, and I wasn't suicidal anymore. I had several more treatments because it takes a while to get, because it straightens out chemicals in your brain too, to just get that more straightened out. But there are sometimes there are people who've had worse memory problems occur. There are people who've had that. But most people, it's a little minimal around the short term, around the time of the session.
Thank you for sharing your very personal story, answering our questions. What kind of role did your parents play during most ill times?
Yeah, it was really hard for them because my mom said I was the perfect kid until I hit my 30s. She said most people, they get a teenager that's just wild and out of control. But I was this perfect kid, and I hit my 30s, and I was like the worst teenager that ever walked the earth. And so they didn't understand, even though we knew at that point that I had bipolar disorder and things, they still couldn't quite separate it from thinking I should know better, things I was doing, I should know better, I was being irresponsible, you know, all these kinds of things, because the things I was doing and saying were just against our family values altogether. So it was very, very difficult for them. But my dad now, my mom's passed away, but my dad now comes with me to the NAMI picnic every year, and he's walked in the walk with me several times. He would have walked more, but my knee was bad. So he's done that, and so he's, as years have gone by, you know, they've understood more. But that said, even though they didn't understand what was going on, they were the ones who bailed me out when I gave all my money away helping that homeless man, and I had nothing because I took out payday advance loan, gave my paycheck to that, took out another payday advance loan, and got spiraled into that until I was like, they were going to come get me. And my dad got me out of that situation, and he's always made sure that I have a car to drive, always. So.
What are some things that people have mistaken about this disorder that you've experienced?
I think more about like the character flaws, that people think that you're just acting this way on purpose. Courage to speak up and add more detail each time, and yeah, but I think it's important to share because there might be other people out there who are struggling, and they need to know who to go to for help.